Hi, my name is Likia Gomez. I'm the consultative sales rep here at MARCIVE. We are very happy to be a sponsor here at this year's eLuna. Um, we're particularly happy to have this presentation with a partner library. It's called Taking Back Control of Authority Control in ALMA, presented by Sarah Cruz at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And here you go.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for your interest in this presentation. If you're attending this session today, I'm really pleased that you are here because authority control is so important for our library catalogs. And nowadays, it can often take a cataloging advocate like you or I to really make it happen. So I want to share a recent project that my library has undergone, which Leah mentioned and refers to taking back of authority control in ALMA. So as many of you know, authority maintenance is a major aspect of cataloging that can easily get lost in the shuffle of technical services projects, unless you really have the staff that is specifically dedicated to the task. While ALMA does have authority control jobs in place to manage this aspect of the catalog, we found in our library that it wasn't doing as thorough as a job as we hoped. We teamed up with MARCIVE, who have allowed us to test their comprehensive notification service, which has remedied as well as enhanced many of our records in ALMA. I would also like to add that much of this project was informed by Temple University's presentation regarding their authority workflows. So there is a significant variation between our processes, but I also highly recommend checking out their presentation from eLuna Learns 2020 in addition to this session. So a little bit about Georgia Tech. We are located in Atlanta, Georgia. We are part of the University System of Georgia, also known as USG. Our main library on campus consists of 3 buildings, which is Crosland Tower, Price Gilbert Memorial Library, and Clow Commons. And inside of Price Gilbert is where we have our reading room for archives and special collections. We also have a small library called the Hinman Library that houses an architecture collection. And I want to note that with this renovation, it came about a project called Library Next. So in 2015, we also have a library service center, which is a 55,000 square foot shared repository in partnership with Emory University, which is located off campus. So this kind of marked the first iteration of Georgia Tech Library Next. In August 2020, we reopened the Price Gilbert Library, which marks the completion of the library renovation. We also have additional campuses in France as well as China and a number of distance and online programs. With Georgia Tech Library Reimagined, as well as being a STEM institution and research library, there's a major shift to really build upon our electronic resources collections. So at the moment, all of our physical collections are held off campus and are circulated from the Library Service Center. The relocation of physical collections and with the onset of the pandemic, moved even our on-site collections of reference reserves and science fiction off-site. So we really found ourselves in a place where discovery is 100% dependent on the availability and quality of our metadata in the library catalog. Working with an authority service like MARCIVE also came as a recommendation of a content discovery initiative we had a couple of years ago, which was to ensure the continuing quality and accuracy of our created bibliographic metadata. And finally, due to some voluntary retirements and departures, we found ourselves with very limited resources. So at the moment, we have 2 catalogers, 1 faculty, which is myself, and 1 staff, and which equates to about 5 technical services staff total. So authority maintenance could not be tended to locally. There are really no procedures in place to do this, so we needed to find a better solution. So as an overview, our library has approximately 2.6 million titles. We have 355,000 physical titles and a little under 1 million volumes. And as you can see, we have predominantly collected electronic resources. So those titles are around 2.2 million. Our ILS is Alma with a bento box and Primo Discovery. And we migrated from Alma in 2015 from Voyager. And the prior migration was in 2001 from Circe Dynex. So here is a big question. What were we doing before MARCIVE? Authorities are checked by our staff while copy cataloging. However, the rest was really left to the guise of the default jobs within Alma. This kind of out-of-the-box approach was catching our more recently imported bib records, but we found our legacy records were not linking. So a lot of our older titles were left seemingly undisturbed. Many of our older records were also still in ACR2 format and needed a ton of cleanup, especially with formatting standard numbers, punctuation, and spelling out descriptions. There was a point where I looked into tackling the authority control task list in Alma, but it's frankly overwhelming. So we found ourselves with 255,000 items to review. So it was really, really difficult to know where to start. Since authority maintenance was a component of our content discovery initiative, we had been in talks with MARCIVE for about some time about approving our records and felt CNS was really the right solution for our situation. Essentially, MARCIVE receives our bibliographic database from Alma, which they then process according to our set profile. They then use this back file to send us quarterly updated records that reflect any changes to headings. Any edits or new records from us are sent to MARCIVE through their overnight authority service, so they can maintain an accurate copy of our database and vice versa. In addition to an up-to-date index, we also added RDA enrichment and included URIs for matched terms. Both the backfile enrichment and overnight authority services included reports with record updates. And in these reports, we could really see firsthand the changes that were made, as well as the headings that were unrecognized and unmatched due to multiple authorized headings. And these were arranged by name, subject, and genre. So I felt with these reports that these really provided our library with a tangible starting point for really remedying these instances. So with all this in mind, we agreed to a 2-year service trial with quarterly notifications in conjunction with the back file. So I brought together a project team with stakeholders from various departments. While meetings and brainstorming was done cross-departmentally, this project was really managed by a single librarian. I split the project into 2 phases. So phase 1 involved establishing the profile and coordination of the back file. And phase 2 was all about incorporating the CNS workflow. So while establishing our profile, one of the considerations was using separate criteria for processing circulating, and special collections, which was something Temple University employed. So while we could have been more granular, since our catalog carries an array of materials, including rare books, theses, finding aids, all the stakeholders agreed that records would benefit from the same processing. So we determined that we came to this conclusion because we determined that our descriptions didn't really veer from typical cataloging conventions. So for instance, we incorporated Library of Congress headings with our thesis descriptions, as well as our Dublin core records were mapped to MARC. So the most time-consuming of the process was really kind of came at this phase where we had to identify which collections within locations for both physical and electronic resources were candidates for enrichment. we're still dealing with remnants of a quick migration and shift of physical stacks, so there's quite a bit to sift through. In addition, we had to consider what other projects the backfile process would impact. So we've been going through an ongoing reclamation project of updating like the outliers of our OCLC numbers, as well as updating our local holdings for our serials records. So making these types of changes to the BIB had to be put on pause, or else these would essentially be lost in this process. Since the start of the pandemic and working remotely, Georgia Tech has been utilizing Microsoft Teams for communication. So this was a really handy tool that we had on hand. I really did not feel the need to stray away from something that was already in place. So we utilized Teams as a repository for materials, including the authority control project guide, and also use features like the notebook to outline our project charter, the chat to communicate, and the planner to assign deadlines to stakeholders. So based on our meetings, and especially with archives and our content strategy librarian, we decided to include in our back file the specific criteria. So active locations, stable purchased electronic titles, theses and dissertations, archival and rare books, as well as finding aids. We did exclude records linked to the community zone, streaming media, leased or subscription electronic titles, since these expire and would be purged eventually, and as well as items marked for withdrawn. So our initial proposed backfile was 1.3 million, was whittled down to about 785,000. Once we had our profile criteria established, we really needed to nail down the logistics for reviewing our sample and give ourselves an ample amount of time in case we had to deal with any issues. We thought about how this project would have the least impact on our library workflows on top of our workloads. We agreed to schedule the backfile extraction, sample review, and reimport process over the winter holiday. So overall, we attributed about 2 months for phase 1. Our first CNS delivery was scheduled for 3 months following that. So while there are a number of tools to explore for this process, and I would encourage you to use what's right for your library and staff. So for instance, there's MarcEdit's MarcCompare, Hypothesis, or even Google Docs. For us, it was, a spreadsheet and the Alma Sandbox. The tools we use are identical to some of our other projects, so I didn't have to really train on anything new, or train the staff with anything new. It was easiest for us to open 2 browser windows with the Alma Sandbox in production, and then record notes and observations on our spreadsheets. I also think it's important to mention that we requested specific record sets to process against our draft profile. So in addition to the returned random sample, with this process, Archives was able to kind of handpick their titles for the sets that we wanted to see. And we also included architecture serials, DVDs, thesis, maps, and microfiche, as well as some e-collections. So really, I mentioned this many times, but it's true that we didn't have the bandwidth to check the anticipated 8,000 records that were going to be returned to us. So each set was copied onto a spreadsheet, uploaded to our shared drive, and then sets were chosen and assigned by one's interest and familiarity with the collection. And I also encouraged our team to pretty much look at the pre-processing changes reports that MARCIVE provided, as well as verify headings through other resources such as Library of Congress authorities or OCLC connection. So each staff is assigned to review their sample set. So this is where their directions. It was about 100 per person and a minimum of 35 records per week or more, depending on their efficiency. So at the end of each week, I asked them to write up an assessment addressing trends and observations based on these questions. And these are questions that Temple University came up with, and they're really good. So I didn't feel the need to deviate from them. But we asked pretty much if headings were already updated locally in Alma due to the automated processing. Did MARCIVE pick the right heading? If not, please describe the error. And did you find anything unexpected or weird from Alma or MARCIVE? So after about 3 training sessions with staff, 1 presentation to library administration, and many check-ins later, we had these results. So we reviewed about 12% of the 8,000 records. The sample was loaded into the sandbox, and I did do a small test of low profile titles in production to see how they would display in Primo. So we did discover minor display issues with punctuation, but this was not a fault of MARCIVE's, but it was more related to our settings. So these are the things that were really done well, and it's what we needed in our catalog. So uncontrolled titles were moved to alternate titles. So for instance, electronic differential analyzer, which was a title in the 740, was shifted to an alternate title, which is the 246. We also had subdivisions updated to genre headings. So we had a number of subdivisions with congresses, and those were flipped to the genre heading conference papers and proceedings. We also had a number of subdivisions flipped in subject headings. So for instance, down below, you can see that human beings' influence on nature was flipped to nature, the effect on human beings. And they're also able to normalize control numbers and corrected our indicators. So since we were dealing with a lot of legacy records, these inconsistencies that I'm going to mention were really based on the condition of our bib records that we initially submitted. So this will most likely vary with your library. The inconsistencies we found that were remedied by MARCIVE, were anything kind of related to RDA. So this affected our records with any like sparse data, which were our older theses. And also, not all AACR2 fields were updated. Some of our CMC records were left unspecified, and there was an odd use of brackets and diacritics, as well as some fields that were missing indicators. But like I said, these were remedied by MARCIVE. And so all of this weirdness was essentially shared on teams. Specific records and their outstanding oddities were noted in the spreadsheet. And once we felt this represented much of kind of the quirks that we found in our records, I organized the feedback and pointed to specific examples. So MARCIVE responded and tweaked our profile as needed, and they also addressed any issues and provided reasoning for why these instances occurred, which was really helpful. The data sets in ALMA were then reran by IT to reflect any updates resulting. So we had about 778,000 records. This is a little bit less than our previous back file of 785,000, after finding that some locations and our electronic collections were processed for the sample that shouldn't have been initially. So combing through each location also helped us lay the groundwork for another project, which was to clean up locations in ALMA that are no longer in use. After we were satisfied with our profiles and processing, MARCIVE ran our back file. So while MARCIVE was doing this, I communicated to all the library about our 1-month freeze. So even though not everyone works in ALMA, it's good to be transparent. So what what our staff could do is continue to catalog new materials, bachelor new records, and add or modify any holdings or items. But the thing that would have to be on pause would be modifying bib records, deleting bib records, performing global changes, and for our department specifically, the reclamation project had to be put on hold. So it took about 3 days for MARCIVE to generate our output file of 778,000 records. I ran a test batch in Sandbox just to see, you always have to run a test batch just to see how they turn out, and everything was fine. It then took about 2 weeks to import our updated back file at 25,000 records at a time. So record imports in ALMA are capped at 10 megabytes, hence a low number. So the 2 weeks that it took to do this accounted for the holidays, as well as re-importing our entire back file due to our discovery of the URI's reordering from the preferred correction job in ALMA. So this I'll kind of touch upon later. And each set really took anywhere from 9 minutes to an hour and a half to upload. So I was able to import approximately 250,000 records per day. So before I speak to the CNS process, I would also like to point out that since we essentially started from scratch on our authority maintenance, we didn't feel like we needed to treat both the sample review of our backfile enrichment and the CNS process differently. So with Temple University, they chose to also evaluate the records received from their first CNS delivery, as well as create a new import profile for mapping the records. We treated both instances of importing our updated records the same. So our backfile review process was pretty much setting the stage for the quality of records we received from CNS. To establish our workflow for CNS, I collaborated with one other staff member to draft our processes for maintaining accuracy in our backfile with MARCIVE, as well as to maintain the currency of our records in our catalog. So we determined that we needed to compile 3 sets. So those being records with changes to an existing bibliographic record in ALMA, new physical titles, and new portfolios in the institution zone. Since the majority of our collections are e-resources, we decided that a monthly extraction through overnight authorities was sufficient and feasible to manage. We designated a local field, which is a 945 for our timestamp, as well as to track when edits have been made in the bib. I did look into how to automate this process, but there isn't a timestamp function in the ALMA normalization rules, even though it has been proposed to development. So our cataloging staff, our staff who copy catalogs, will add the convention of a month in the year. Then every month we search for that local field, save the query, and export the set to send to overnight authorities. To extract our newly cataloged physical materials, we run a simple analytics report, which I title New Physical Items Received Monthly, and filter out records by date. Sometimes we do compare the MMS IDs from our edited bib set to make sure that we are not sending duplicates. We then pull the MMS IDs and create an itemized set to export. So the same process is done with our new local portfolios. In ALMA Analytics, we run the report, new institution zone portfolios created monthly, and it's pretty much set up to identify records that are not linked to the community zone, and they are filtered by the electronic collection public name, since not all of our local collections really qualify for processing. So this does have to be edited from time to time once we receive new collections. From this point, then we also pull the MMS IDs and then upload a set to ALMA to export. So once we send these 3 sets to MARCIVE, it's less than a 24-hour turnaround to receive and import them. So our CNS delivery is similar to the overnight authority service process, except we receive all our updates from our back file. So even with a smaller file to upload, we did experience some network timeouts. So that was a little bit of an issue, but it did work after a couple repeated attempts. Our initial delivery was only 25,757 records due to our small collection. We did utilize the same import profile created for the back file loads, and also found that, and through this also found that 18 of our records didn't have a match. We saved those 18 records as a set to investigate, then ran a job to delete these bibs, and we'll send an update to MARCIVE so they can update our database with them. Once these records were loaded, we also did a spot check to make sure there was no issues. So as we all know, no process is perfect. So we do have a few ongoing challenges to mention. We did deactivate our ALMA authority jobs once I discovered that the preferred term correction job rearranges our URIs in the subject strings. So as you can see in the example, they kind of all fall to the end, which is not ideal. This is not MARCIVE's fault, and it's something I discovered later on in a PCC document. But you can specify and ask them to only add URIs to subjects that represent full entities. And also with ALMA as an ILS, this does not resolve all authority issues, especially in electronic resource heavy catalog. So there can be quality issues in the community zone records, as well as with vendor records for our subscription titles. And for our library specifically, with our reclamation project of updating OCLC numbers, this contributed to a fair amount of records to send to MARCIVE to refresh our back file, but it's really a negligible amount compared to how much is processed or enriches our records. Also, with the small staff and the need to rehire, training and education is a constant. So future projects that kind of came from this process, which are to compile our multiple matches and unrecognized subject terms from the reports and remedy those headings to get them processed again. And we'd also like to comb through our locations and kind of like clean up the inactive locations that we noticed during our backfile process. And lastly, we would like to utilize the new analytics object to kind of schedule and run the monthly new titles reports. Okay. So by far, the benefits of working with MARCIVE outweigh any of our challenges. Our backfile updated headings and older records that ALMA bypassed. So we felt that it was in some ways better than ALMA at maintaining our access points. AACR2 records were updated to RDA format. They're able to normalize our control numbers. They removed any duplicate local fields. They also added genres based on our subdivisions. And the addition of URIs provided us pretty much with a placeholder for linked data and the possibility to maintain various vocabularies in-house. The reports also gave us a feasible starting point for training and remedying our multi-match and unmatched headings. So once we pretty much implemented the CNS workflow, we really found that there are little to no issues. And it didn't take very much time either to kind of go through it monthly. So this outlines my lessons learned. So if or when you decide to do this process, these are aspects I would consider. I would add fast headings. It was not our local practice to have them, but looking towards the future, it may be for linked data. Also, I realized that IT didn't need to be involved because I was able to pull these records from ALMA on my own, and especially, with the knowledge of basic HTML, basic like XML, it's not really necessary to involve kind of other departments if you don't need to. It also would have been ideal to have a script to compile new and updated records in ALMA to send through overnight authorities, but this is something that I would like to look into later on. And as mentioned, we could have been more granular with this process, but utilizing the same import profile and creating a data profile applicable to both circulating in archives pretty much proved to be the most manageable. And it would have been nice to further explore the variations between MARCIVE CNS and the ALMA Authority jobs, but by far, the comprehensive notification service was a straightforward process, and MARCIVE really helped us out, and they were dedicated to like answering any questions we have, or especially with like the URIs and things like that. And with our output set, it was a little bit small. So with 25,000 records, we could have aimed to have a little bit more, but we really wanted to minimize the instances of timeouts upon the import process, but this also gave us more records to upload. So some final words. While we're still working towards a fix-all solution, MARCIVE really provided us with the consistency we were lacking in our access points, as well as gave us an opportunity to enhance records to RDA format and incorporate URIs to prepare our records for a linked data environment. So new collections are coming in daily, and our department is still preparing, for instance, a shelf-ready popular reading collection, as well as a slew of like new e-resources that are not yet in the community zone. So I really feel that CNS fulfills a gap that we had in our catalog and provides a service that really performed beyond our expectations. Okay, so here's my contact in case you want to reach out with any questions, and thank you.
Hi, so before we get to the questions, I want to really thank Sarah for taking time and putting this presentation together. Our potential partner libraries love hearing about the timelines and the details of what records to send, and ultimately if it's beneficial to partner with MARCIVE. If you would like a custom quote and proposal, you can reach out to me. It's really easy, info@marcive.com, info@marcive.com. And I guess that's it.